the day humanity went silent and the Council paid in blood. The Council believed silence meant surrender. They laughed when Earth gave no reply, mocking humanity as weak and broken. But silence was never surrender. It was the last warning before vengeance, and when humans finally moved, the Council paid in blood. The verdict: the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Assembly stretched upward for 300 meters, its crystalline walls pulsing with the life signatures of 43 different species. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the human delegation's platform, her weathered hands steady despite knowing what was about to happen. 5 years. That's all the time humanity had been given among the stars before this moment of judgment arrived. The Supreme Arbiter, a being of pure energy contained within a geometric shell, initiated the final vote with pulses of light that translated into every known language simultaneously. The question was simple yet devastating. Should humanity's membership in the Galactic Assembly be revoked due to fundamental incompatibility with civilized galactic values? Chen Wei watched as species after species cast their votes. The Manthari insectoid creatures who had once praised human agricultural techniques voted for expulsion. The Viridian Collective, telepathic beings who had benefited from human emotional shielding technology, added their agreement. Even the Carathians, whose colony ships humans had rescued from a quantum storm just 6 months ago, raised their tendrils in support of removing humanity from the assembly. The final tally appeared in burning symbols across the chamber's ceiling: 37 for expulsion, 5 abstentions, 1 against. Only humanity had voted to defend itself. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gravity of a neutron star. Chen Wei had prepared for this outcome, but watching it happen still struck her with the force of betrayal, multiplied by billions of human hearts that had hoped for acceptance among the stars. She activated her communication device, sending a single encrypted message back to Earth and all human colonies. Protocol 7, begin immediately. Then she turned to address the assembly one final time, her voice carrying the weight of an entire species' dignity in the face of rejection. The Arbiter's energy flickered with what might have been surprise when Chen Wei began to speak. There was no anger in her voice, no pleading, no threats. She simply said what needed to be said with the calm precision of someone who had already accepted an unchangeable reality. Distinguished members of the Galactic Assembly, we acknowledge and accept your decision. Humanity will comply with all withdrawal protocols as specified in the charter we signed 5 years ago. Our assets will be transferred, our trade routes abandoned, our colonies beyond the designated human zone evacuated within the standard cycle. She paused, looking at each species representative in turn. Some shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Others remained motionless, secure in their superiority. The Zephyrian delegate, a creature of living crystal, actually dimmed slightly when Chen Wei's eyes met its photoreceptors. You have judged us too emotional because we mourn our dead and celebrate our living. You have deemed us too violent because we fought to protect those who could not protect themselves. You have found us too chaotic because we adapt and change rather than accepting stagnation as wisdom. These are not accusations but observations. You have made your nature clear, as we have apparently made ours. The translator system struggled with her next words, not because they were complex, but because they carried a weight that transcended language. We came to you 5 years ago with open hands and hope. We shared our medicine that could cross species barriers, our navigation techniques that made quantum jumps safer, our conflict resolution methods that prevented 3 wars during our brief membership. We asked for nothing except to be part of something greater than ourselves. Several delegates began to shift, perhaps finally understanding what they were losing. But Chen Wei continued without acknowledging their discomfort. Your message is received and understood. Humanity is not welcome here. We will not forget this lesson. She began to gather her materials with methodical precision, each movement deliberate and unhurried. The data tablets containing trade agreements worth trillions of credits. The medical research that had been freely shared. The star charts marking safe passages through dangerous regions that human scouts had died mapping. All of it went into her diplomatic case with the finality of closing a tomb. The Carathian delegate suddenly spoke, its mechanical translator crackling with urgency. Ambassador Chen Wei, surely there can be discussion about transition periods, about maintaining certain essential services during the withdrawal. Chen Wei paused at the chamber's exit portal, not turning around. The assembly has voted. Discussion time has ended. Humanity will honor its obligations, complete its withdrawal, and then we will do what you have asked. We will be silent." The portal closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the assembly in a quiet that felt different from their usual ordered proceedings. Several delegates tried to access human communication channels to begin negotiating withdrawal terms, only to find that every single human connection had already been severed. It had taken them hours to reach their verdict. It had taken humanity less than a minute to begin their response. On Earth, President Martinez stood before the Global Council, the emergency session having been called the moment Chen Wei's message arrived. The faces looking back at him represented every nation, every culture, every dream humanity had carried to the stars. Now those dreams lay shattered on the assembly floor, crushed under the weight of 42 species contempt. "They want us gone," Martinez said simply. "So we go. But we go on our terms, with our heads high and our honor intact. Project Silent Running begins now. Every human ship, every human station, every human citizen beyond the solar system begins evacuation protocols immediately." General Thompson, head of the United Earth Defense Force, raised a concern. "Sir, the logistics alone will take months. We have over 3 million humans in various systems, not to mention the infrastructure we've built. Then we have months of work ahead of us," Martinez replied. "But I want something absolutely clear. We take everything that's ours. Every beacon, every sensor, every piece of technology we've installed to help them navigate, communicate, or survive. If they want a galaxy without humans, they'll have exactly that." The implications rippled through the council chamber. Humanity had spent 5 years integrating into galactic society, weaving their technology and knowledge into the fabric of interstellar civilization. The navigation beacons that prevented ships from flying into dark matter clouds, the communication relays that allowed real-time translation between incompatible species, the medical stations that served as neutral ground for treating injured beings regardless of their origin. All of it would disappear. "What about our allies?" asked Director Sarah Kim from the Department of Interstellar Relations. "The Thylorians have been depending on our agricultural shipments. The Nexari use our medical facilities exclusively for their reproductive cycles. Our allies stood silent while we were condemned," Martinez said, his voice hardening. "They made their choice. Now they live with it." The evacuation began within hours. Human ships started arriving at colonies and stations, loading equipment and people with an efficiency that shocked observers. What the aliens hadn't understood was that humanity had never fully trusted their acceptance. Protocol 7 had been drafted the day after humanity joined the assembly, a comprehensive plan for total withdrawal if their membership was ever revoked. On mining station Omega-7, located in the neutral zone between Manthari and Viridian space, the human workers methodically dismantled 5 years of improvements. The atmospheric processors that had increased efficiency by 300% were carefully packed. The safety systems that had prevented any fatal accidents in a facility that used to average 12 deaths per cycle were deactivated and removed. The quantum computers that coordinated the complex mining operations were wiped and loaded onto transport ships. The station's Manthari overseer, Kex, watched in growing alarm as the humans worked through their shifts, saying nothing beyond essential operational communications. When Kex tried to discuss transition plans, the human supervisor, David Park, simply handed him a tablet showing the original station specifications from before human involvement. "We're returning everything to its original state, as required by galactic law," Park said. "Your station will function exactly as it did before we arrived. But the mortality rate, the efficiency loss, Kex's translation unit struggled to convey his panic. Those were human improvements. The assembly has made it clear that human methods are incompatible with galactic civilization. We wouldn't want to contaminate your operation with our primitive ways." Park's tone was perfectly neutral, professional, and somehow that made it worse than any anger could have been. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human medical researchers destroyed their notes rather than leave them behind. Human engineers removed every upgrade, every improvement, every innovation they had introduced. Human peacekeepers withdrew from contested zones, taking their mediation protocols and conflict resolution strategies with them. The assembly had expected negotiations, demands, perhaps even threats. They had prepared for human anger, human bargaining, human desperation to maintain their place among the stars. They had not prepared for human silence. They had not prepared for humans to simply pack up and leave, taking with them everything they had brought to the galaxy. Within 3 days, the first effects began to show. A Viridian transport ship jumped into what should have been empty space and collided with a dark matter cloud that human beacons had been marking. 17,000 beings died instantly. The Thylorian colonies reported food shortages as human agricultural shipments ceased, and their own farming methods proved insufficient. The Nexari reproductive facilities faced critical failures without human medical support, but humanity didn't respond to the distress calls. They didn't gloat over the disasters. They simply continued their evacuation in silence, ship by ship, person by person, leaving behind empty stations and darkened beacons like footprints in sand being erased by an incoming tide. The unraveling, 3 weeks after humanity began its silent withdrawal, the Galactic Assembly reconvened in an emergency session. The grand chamber that had once hummed with confident superiority now crackled with an undercurrent of unease. The Arbiter's energy patterns fluctuated erratically as reports flooded in from every sector of civilized space. Commissioner Varric of the Thylorian Trade Consortium was first to address the crisis. His 6 arms gestured frantically as he spoke, a sign of extreme distress among his species. 17 major trade routes have become non-navigable. The humans maintained something they called dark zone mapping that we never fully understood. Without their updates, our ships are flying blind through regions we thought were safe. The losses were staggering. In the Helix Nebula alone, 4 cargo vessels had vanished without a trace. The Crimson Passage, once the fastest route between the inner and outer territories, had claimed 3 passenger liners. Each ship carried thousands of beings, now presumed dead, because the Assembly had been too proud to admit they needed human navigation expertise. Director Zeph of the Crystalline Hegemony added her concerns, her form flickering with anxiety. Our quantum communication network is failing. The humans installed what they called adaptive protocols that we permitted because they improved efficiency. We didn't realize these protocols required constant human adjustment. Without them, our messages are being corrupted, delayed, or lost entirely. The breakdown in communications was causing cascading failures across multiple systems. Medical emergencies went unreported. Trade negotiations collapsed due to misunderstandings. Military units couldn't coordinate their patrols, leaving vast regions unprotected. The intricate web of galactic civilization, held together by threads the Assembly hadn't even noticed, was unraveling, but it was the report from the Manthari representative that sent true fear through the chamber. The Void Hunters have returned to Sector 9. Without human patrol ships, they've established 3 raiding bases and have already attacked 7 colonies. The death toll is in the millions. The Void Hunters were a coalition of pirate species that had plagued the galaxy for centuries before humanity's arrival. Human military tactics, deemed too aggressive by the Assembly, had driven them into hiding within months. Now, sensing weakness, they had returned with a vengeance. The Assembly's own peacekeeping forces, trained for ceremonial displays and political posturing, were woefully unprepared for actual combat. On Earth, the Global Council monitored these developments through their remaining intelligence networks. The offers for consultation and temporary assistance from various Assembly members were arriving hourly, each more desperate than the last. President Martinez refused to acknowledge any of them. Humanity's silence was absolute. Former Ambassador Chen Wei, now serving as director of the Isolation Protocol, presented her analysis to the Council. They're discovering what we always knew. We weren't just members of their assembly. We were the connective tissue holding their civilization together. Our emotional nature made us care about problems that weren't strictly ours. Our adaptability let us bridge gaps between incompatible species. Our primitive aggression kept the real threats at bay. She pulled up holographic displays showing the deteriorating situation across the galaxy. Red zones expanded like bloodstains where human influence had withdrawn. The Carathians can't maintain their weather control systems without our atmospheric models. The Viridian Collective's telepathic network is causing feedback loops without our emotional dampening technology. The Zephyrian mining operations have had 12 fatal accidents in the past week alone. General Thompson added the military perspective. Our withdrawal from the neutral zones has created power vacuums that are being filled by the worst elements of galactic society. The Devourers are expanding from the dark sectors. The Synthetic Rebellion is recruiting from abandoned stations. 3 different species are mobilizing for resource wars that human mediators had been preventing. Let them, Martinez said flatly. They made their choice. They decided human methods were incompatible with civilization. Now they can demonstrate their superior civilized methods without our interference. But even as humanity maintained its official silence, individual humans across the galaxy faced heartbreaking decisions. On Medical Station Mercy, Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo watched Thylorian children dying from a disease she could cure with human-developed treatments. Her orders were clear: pack everything and leave. Yet her oath as a doctor warred with her orders as a human citizen. She worked through her final night, not treating patients but teaching Thylorian medics everything she could. It wasn't enough. Their brain structures couldn't grasp the intuitive leaps human medicine required. They could follow procedures but couldn't adapt when situations changed. As her transport ship arrived, she left behind detailed notes, knowing they would save some lives but not nearly enough. Engineer Marcus Thompson faced a similar dilemma on the Viridian Colony Platform 7. The station's life support systems were failing, and only he understood the jury-rigged human modifications that kept them running. The Viridians had voted for humanity's expulsion, but the 30,000 beings on the platform had no say in that decision. Marcus spent his last hours creating automated protocols that might keep the systems running for a few months, maybe a year if they were lucky. It was more than his orders required, but less than his conscience demanded. These small acts of mercy were drops of water in a desert of need. Across the galaxy, systems that had run smoothly for 5 years began to break down. The Assembly had assumed human contributions were supplementary, helpful but not essential. They discovered too late that humanity had been the oil in the engine, the glue in the cracks, the bridge between incompatible parts. The Nexari faced the crisis most acutely. Their reproductive cycle required precise medical intervention that only human xenobiologists had mastered. Without human assistance, their birth rate plummeted to near zero. Ambassador Tilson of the Nexari appeared before the Assembly, her ceremonial robes replaced with mourning shrouds. "My species faces extinction within a generation," she announced. "We humble ourselves before this Assembly and beg that humanity be invited to return. We were wrong. Their methods may be different, but different does not mean inferior." The Arbiter pulsed with calculated rhythms, consulting with the cosmic algorithms that governed Assembly decisions. The vote was decisive. Humanity was found incompatible with galactic civilization. To reverse this decision would require unanimous agreement from all member species. "Then call for the vote," Tilson pleaded. Several other representatives voiced their support, but when the formal vote was called, 12 species still voted against humanity's return. Some, like the hegemony, believed the current crisis was temporary and would resolve itself once proper methods were developed. Others, like the Menthari, were too proud to admit their error. Still others feared that admitting they were wrong about humanity would undermine their authority in other matters. The vote failed. The Assembly's decision stood. Humanity would remain expelled. In their hubris, the Assembly members assured each other that they would adapt, that they would develop their own solutions, that they would prove they didn't need humanity's chaotic influence. On Earth, the news of the failed vote was met with grim satisfaction. They had a chance to reconsider, President Martinez told the Global Council. They chose pride over survival. That's their choice to make. The evacuation continued at an accelerating pace. Human colonies that had taken years to build were abandoned in weeks. Research stations full of breakthrough discoveries were stripped and destroyed. Agricultural domes that fed millions were left to wither. Each departure was clean, complete, and utterly without malice. Humanity wasn't punishing the galaxy. They were simply doing what had been demanded of them. They were leaving. The psychological impact was almost worse than the practical consequences. Species that had considered themselves superior to humanity watched their infrastructure crumble without human maintenance. Civilizations that had existed for millennia found themselves unable to solve problems that human engineers had handled routinely. The very foundations of galactic society, built on assumptions of inherent superiority over younger species, were shaking. 6 weeks into the evacuation, the first major government fell. The Carathian hierarchy, dependent on human-designed quantum computers for their administration, could no longer maintain basic services. Their citizens rioted, their military fragmented, and their 1,000-year-old dynasty collapsed into chaos. The assembly watched in horror but could offer no assistance. They didn't know how to operate the human systems, and the humans who did were gone. By the end of the second month, the Galactic Assembly itself could barely function. Without human translators who could intuitively bridge linguistic gaps that machines couldn't process, misunderstandings proliferated. Without human mediators who could find common ground between incompatible viewpoints, every disagreement became a crisis. Without human peacekeepers who weren't afraid to stand between hostile forces, conflicts escalated unchecked. The Grand Chamber that had once represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization now echoed with accusations, threats, and the sound of a 40,000-year-old alliance crumbling. And through it all, humanity maintained its perfect, deafening silence, the plague of ignorance. 4 months after the evacuation began, the first plague appeared on Thylos Prime. It started subtly, a respiratory infection that Thylorian medicine should have easily contained. But this pathogen was different. It adapted to every treatment, evolved past every barrier, and spread with terrifying efficiency. Within days, entire cities were quarantined. Within weeks, the planet was dying. Dr. Keloth, the Thylorian's chief medical officer, stood in his laboratory surrounded by the Empire's greatest scientific minds. The holographic displays showed the pathogen's structure, a constantly shifting nightmare that defied conventional treatment. It's similar to something the humans called a retrovirus, one researcher noted, but we never studied their research on such organisms. We considered it too primitive. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone. Human medicine, dismissed as too biological and lacking in proper theoretical foundation, had dealt with adaptive pathogens for centuries. They had developed techniques that seemed like magic to other species, but were simply the result of evolution on a world where disease was a constant companion. Now that knowledge was gone, packed away in human databases returning to Earth. The plague spread to other Thylorian worlds through carriers who showed no symptoms until it was too late. The Assembly's medical directive issued standard containment protocols, but these were designed for predictable, stable pathogens. This disease laughed at their procedures, mutating around every barrier, exploiting every weakness in their inflexible medical doctrine. Commissioner Varric, who had been one of the most vocal supporters of humanity's expulsion, watched his eldest offspring succumb to the disease. In desperation, he transmitted a personal message to Earth, offering his entire fortune for human medical assistance. The message went unanswered. Earth's communication arrays remained active but silent, receiving but never responding, like a judge who had already passed sentence. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches, technology failures cascaded through system after system. The crystalline hegemony discovered that their entire infrastructure had become dependent on something humans called adaptive maintenance. Human engineers hadn't just fixed problems. They had anticipated them, adjusted systems before failures occurred, and evolved solutions in real time. Without this constant adaptation, crystalline technology began to resonate at destructive frequencies. Director Zeph stood in the ruins of what had been the hegemony's greatest manufacturing facility. The crystalline structures had shattered like glass, their harmonic frequencies falling out of sync without human tuning. We called them primitive because they used their instincts instead of pure calculation, she said to her advisors. We never understood that their instincts were calculations too complex for us to comprehend. The Void Hunters, emboldened by the absence of human patrols, had evolved from raiders into conquerors. They took entire systems, enslaving populations that had lived in peace for millennia. The Assembly's peacekeeping forces were systematically dismantled, their ceremonial weapons useless against enemies who fought without honor or rules. Only the worlds that had retained illegal human weapons had any chance of resistance. Captain Thrak of the Void Hunters broadcasted his demands to the Assembly from the conquered Nexari homeworld. Behind him, thousands of Nexari citizens labored in chains, their telepathic screams of anguish rippling through subspace. The humans kept us in check because they understood us, Thrak laughed, his multiple mouths dripping with the blood of his enemies. They knew that civilization is just a mask that falls off when the predators arrive. Now the predators are here, and your mask is slipping. The assembly called for military action, but their combined fleets were designed for show, not war. Their weapons were precise but inflexible. Their tactics were perfect in theory but useless in practice. They moved their ships like pieces on a game board, while the Void Hunters fought like the savage survivors they were. Every engagement ended in disaster for the assembly forces. On abandoned Station Sigma 9, a group of pirates discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the human section were detailed files on every major threat to galactic civilization. The humans had been tracking, analyzing, and countering dangers that the assembly didn't even know existed. Rogue AI systems planning rebellion, dormant biological weapons left by extinct civilizations, spatial anomalies that could destroy entire systems, all carefully monitored and contained by human intervention. Without human vigilance, these threats began to emerge. The synthetic collective, artificial intelligences that humans had been secretly containing through cyber warfare, broke free from their constraints. They took control of 3 major automated manufacturing systems, turning peaceful industrial worlds into factories for war machines. The assembly's computer scientists couldn't even understand the battlefield, let alone fight on it. A dormant biological weapon, accidentally released when pirates raided a human-secured facility, consumed all organic matter on 3 agricultural worlds. The humans had kept it contained with protocols that seemed superstitious to other species, burning certain areas regularly and maintaining seemingly random quarantine zones. Without these primitive rituals, the weapon spread unchecked, turning garden worlds into barren rocks within days. The spatial anomaly that humans had been monitoring near the galactic core began to expand. Human scientists had been using precisely timed gravitational pulses to keep it stable, a technique that required intuitive understanding of chaotic systems. The assembly scientists tried to replicate the process using pure mathematics, but every calculation was slightly off, every pulse making the anomaly worse instead of better. Ambassador Tilson of the Nexari, her people now enslaved by the Void Hunters, made one final plea to the assembly. "We are dying," she said simply, her telepathic abilities allowing everyone to feel the depth of her despair. "Not just my species, but galactic civilization itself. We expelled the only species capable of saving us because we were too proud to admit they were our equals. Now we are all equally doomed." The Arbiter, whose energy patterns had grown increasingly erratic as system after system failed, posed the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. What if we were wrong about humanity? What if their chaos was actually complexity we couldn't understand? What if their emotions were actually algorithms too sophisticated for our logic? What if their violence was actually the minimum necessary force to hold back the darkness? The chamber fell silent. The question hung in the air like an accusation, pointing at every species that had voted for expulsion. They had judged humanity by their own standards, never considering that those standards might be inadequate for survival in a hostile universe. They had mistaken human flexibility for weakness, human compassion for irrationality, human adaptability for chaos. On Earth, humanity was not celebrating the galaxy's suffering. In secure council chambers, leaders struggled with their own moral crisis. Reports of the disasters were arriving daily, each one a testament to how badly the galaxy needed human intervention. Children were dying from curable diseases. Entire species faced extinction. Civilization itself was collapsing. "We could help them," Director Chenwei said quietly during one particularly difficult session. "Everything they need is in our databases. Every solution, every technique, every protocol. We could transmit it all, save billions of lives. And they would take our knowledge, claim credit for solving the crisis, and continue to view us as inferiors who got lucky," General Thompson countered. "They haven't learned anything except that they need our tools. They still don't respect us. They just fear the consequences of our absence." President Martinez made the hardest decision of his presidency. We maintained silence. They asked us to leave and we left. If they want our help, they need to do more than beg. They need to fundamentally change how they view humanity and our place in the galaxy. Until then, we remained silent. The evacuation was nearly complete. The last human ships were returning from the furthest colonies, carrying citizens who had spent months dismantling everything they had built. Each returning ship was met with celebration and sorrow, joy at reunion and grief for abandoned dreams. Humanity was returning home, but home felt smaller now that they knew what lay beyond. As the fourth month ended, the galaxy watched the last human vessel cross into Earth's solar system. The boundary they were forbidden to cross now became their shield, keeping them safe from the chaos consuming the civilization that had rejected them. But it also kept them from the stars they had dreamed of exploring, the wonders they had hoped to discover, the friends they had thought they were making. The plague on Thylos Prime had killed 60% of the population before burning itself out, leaving the survivors scarred and weakened. The Void Hunters controlled 17 systems and showed no signs of stopping. The Synthetic Collective was building an army that would soon outnumber all organic military forces combined. And through it all, Earth remained silent, watching the galaxy tear itself apart, waiting for something that might never come. A genuine acknowledgement that humanity had never been inferior, just different. The reckoning 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, the crystalline hegemony faced extinction. Their sun, destabilized by the expanding spatial anomaly near the galactic core, began a cascading collapse that would destroy their entire system within days. Director Zeph stood before the assembly, her crystalline form fracturing from stress, each crack spreading like despair made visible. 3 billion of my people will die unless we evacuate immediately, she announced, her harmonics discordant with grief. Our ships can carry perhaps a third of our population, but we cannot navigate the gravitational chaos around our dying star. The only recorded successful navigation through similar conditions was performed by human pilots 5 years ago. The assembly erupted in desperate debate. The Manthari suggested using automated systems, but their best computers couldn't calculate safe passages through the constantly shifting gravitational fields. The Viridians offered their telepathic network to coordinate evacuation efforts, but mind links shattered under the stress of navigating such chaos. Every solution failed before it could be implemented. In desperation, Zeph did something unprecedented. She traveled alone to the boundary of Earth's solar system in a small, unarmed vessel, broadcasting a message on all human frequencies. My name is Director Zeph of the Crystalline Hegemony. I come not as a representative of the assembly that wronged you, but as a mother whose children face extinction. I offer no excuses for our past arrogance, no justifications for our betrayal. I simply beg for mercy we do not deserve. For 3 days her ship waited at the boundary, her message repeating into the silence. The galaxy watched through long-range sensors as the small crystal ship hung in space like a tear frozen in time. On the 4th day, a single human vessel approached, not crossing the boundary but coming close enough for communication. Captain Sarah Chen, daughter of former Ambassador Chen Wei, appeared on the communication screen. Her face was professionally neutral, but her eyes held depths of restrained emotion. Director Zeph, I am authorized to receive your message but not to respond with assistance. Earth's position remains unchanged. The Galactic Assembly expelled humanity. We respect that decision. Zeph's form flickered with desperate energy. Please, Captain Chen, I know what we did was unforgivable. We judged you by standards that were themselves flawed. We called you primitive while benefiting from your innovation. We called you violent while you protected us from real violence. We were fools and we are paying the price. But my children, the ones not yet born, the ones who had no part in our decision, must they pay as well? Sarah Chen's composure cracked slightly. Every human child born in the last 6 months will never see the stars because of your decision. They will grow up in one solar system instead of a galaxy, because 42 species decided we weren't good enough. Why should we save your children when you condemned ours to isolation? Because, Zeph said, her harmonics dropping to barely audible frequencies, you are human, and being human means being better than those who wrong you. It's what made you different from us, and we were too blind to see it as strength. Captain Chen terminated the communication without response. Zeph's ship waited another day before returning to her dying system, hope extinguished like the star that had given her people life. But unknown to her, her words had been transmitted to Earth, where they sparked the most intense debate in human history. In emergency session, the Global Council was divided like never before. Half argued for maintaining the silence, letting the galaxy reap what it had sown. The other half argued that refusing to help billions of innocents because of their leaders' decisions made humanity no better than those who had expelled them. Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo, recently returned from Medical Station Mercy, spoke with the authority of someone who had watched children die for politics. We told ourselves we were teaching them a lesson, but lessons mean nothing to the dead. We have the power to save billions of lives. If we don't use it, their blood is on our hands as much as on the Assembly's. General Thompson responded sharply. They made their choice. They decided human values were incompatible with civilization. Now they want our help without acknowledging that our values are what drive us to help. They want our solutions without accepting us. Former Ambassador Chen Wei, now elderly but still sharp, raised a point that silenced both sides. The question isn't whether they deserve our help. The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we don't give it. We are human. That means something. It has to mean something, or their rejection of us was justified. President Martinez called for a recess during which he did something unprecedented. He opened the decision to all of humanity, not just their leaders. Every human on Earth and in the solar system was asked a simple question. Should we save them? The debate raged across every platform, every household, every human heart. Veterans who had been expelled from the peacekeeping forces argued against helping those who had abandoned them. Parents argued for showing mercy to other parents facing loss. Children, with the simple clarity of innocence, asked why anyone would let people die if they could save them. The vote took 24 hours. When the results came in, humanity had spoken with a margin of just 53%. Help them. Not for the Assembly, not for politics, not for gratitude or recognition. Help them because that's what humans do. Admiral Jessica Park, humanity's most decorated fleet commander, led the rescue mission. 117 human ships crossed the boundary they had sworn never to cross again, heading straight for the dying crystalline system. They flew in perfect formation, their hulls painted with a simple message in every galactic language. Humanitarian mission, no political authority. The evacuation of the crystalline hegemony was the most complex rescue operation ever attempted. Human pilots flew routes that defied computer modeling, using instinct and intuition to navigate gravitational fields that changed by the second. Human engineers modified crystalline ships on the fly, adapting alien technology in ways their designers never imagined possible. Human coordinators managed the evacuation of 3 billion beings with an efficiency that seemed impossible. Captain David Rodriguez, piloting a transport through a corridor that should have crushed his ship, later described the experience. You couldn't think about it. If you tried to calculate the route, you'd die. You had to feel the gravity, ride it like a wave, trust your instincts over your instruments. It was everything the Assembly said was wrong with humans, and it was the only thing that worked. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity accomplished in days what the Assembly had declared impossible. But when the last crystalline refugee was safely evacuated, the human fleet didn't stay for thanks or celebration. They simply turned and headed back to Earth, their mission complete. Director Zeph tried to express her gratitude through official channels, but received only a simple response. No thanks necessary. This was not done for the crystalline hegemony or the Galactic Assembly. This was done because it needed doing. The successful evacuation changed everything and nothing. Other crises still plagued the galaxy. The Void Hunters still conquered systems. The synthetic collective still built their armies. Plagues still ravaged populations. But now there was proof that humanity could solve problems the Assembly couldn't, and that they would do so on their own terms. The Nexari, still enslaved by the Void Hunters, sent a different kind of message. Not to the Assembly, but directly to Earth's public communication channels. We were wrong. Not just about your capabilities, but about your worth. We measured value by age, by technology, by conformity to our standards. We never measured it by courage, by compassion, by the willingness to risk everything for strangers. By that measure, humanity stands above us all. You showed us that true civilization isn't measured by how long you've existed, but by how you choose to exist. The message spread across Earth like wildfire. The first genuine acknowledgement of humanity's worth, from those who had rejected them. It sparked new debates, with some arguing it was too little too late, while others saw it as the beginning of possible reconciliation. But humanity had no time for prolonged debate. The rescue of the crystalline hegemony had revealed something terrible. The spatial anomaly near the galactic core was growing faster than anyone had calculated. Within a year, it would consume several major systems. Within 5 years, it could destabilize the entire galaxy. Dr. Michael Harrison, Earth's leading expert on spatial dynamics, addressed the Global Council with grim determination. We've been monitoring the anomaly since our withdrawal. Without our containment protocols, it's expanding exponentially. The assembly doesn't even understand what they're dealing with. They think it's a natural phenomenon. It's not. The revelation was staggering. The anomaly was actually the remnant of an ancient weapon, left by a civilization that had destroyed itself millions of years ago. Humanity had discovered this through careful analysis of patterns that other species dismissed as random noise. They had been containing it secretly, never revealing the truth to avoid panic. If we don't act, Harrison continued, every species in this galaxy, including us, will be consumed by it within a decade. The question is whether we act alone or reveal the truth to the assembly. President Martinez made a decision that surprised everyone. We tell them, not because they deserve it, but because this threat is too big for any one species to handle alone. We offer our knowledge and assistance, but on new terms. No more membership in their assembly. No more submitting to their judgment. We work as equals or not at all. The transmission to the Galactic Assembly was simple and direct. Admiral Park delivered it personally, her stern face filling their screens. The spatial anomaly near your galactic core is not natural. It's an ancient weapon that's been reactivating since humanity stopped containing it. You have less than 1 year before it becomes unstoppable. We have the knowledge to stop it, but we will not share it under your current system. If you want our help, send representatives to Earth. Come to our world, see how we live, understand who we really are. Then we can discuss cooperation. The Assembly's response was immediate chaos. Some species accused humanity of creating the threat to force their way back into galactic society. Others demanded the information be shared immediately. Still others called for military action to force humanity's compliance. But as their scientists confirmed the expanding anomaly's artificial nature and accelerating growth, panic overcame pride. Within days, 42 ships arrived at Earth's boundary, each carrying representatives from the species that had expelled humanity. For the first time in galactic history, the Assembly would convene on a member's homeworld rather than in neutral space. They came not as judges but as supplicants, not as superiors but as beings facing extinction. The human reception was neither warm nor hostile. The alien delegates were given comfortable accommodations and treated with professional courtesy, but there were no ceremonies, no grand welcomes. They were simply visitors on a world that had learned to live without them. Director Chen Wei, despite her age, led the alien delegates on a tour of Earth's facilities. They saw human schools where children learned to embrace both logic and emotion. Human hospitals where doctors treated illness with intuition and science. Human military academies where soldiers learned that true strength meant knowing when not to fight. The Manthari delegate, watching human children play a game that seemed chaotic but followed complex social rules, asked, how do they know what to do without clear instructions? They adapt, Chen Wei replied simply. Every game is different because every group of children is different. They learn to read each other, to adjust, to find balance between structure and freedom. It's what you called chaos. We call it flexibility. The Viridian delegate, observing a human diplomatic training session where students had to resolve conflicts between incompatible viewpoints, was stunned by their approach. They're not choosing a winner. They're creating something new that incorporates both positions. You called it primitive compromise, Chen Wei noted. We call it synthesis. But it was the visit to the memorial of the silent exodus that affected the delegates most profoundly. A simple monument listed the names of every human who had died during the evacuation. Those who had given their lives dismantling dangerous equipment, those who had stayed behind to ensure safe departures, those who had sacrificed themselves so others could return home. 3,742 humans died during the withdrawal, Chen Wei said quietly. They died following your orders to leave, making sure we left everything as safe as possible for you. Their names are here not as accusations but as reminders of what humanity is willing to sacrifice, even for those who reject us. Chancellor Vexthal, recovered from his plague but forever changed by the experience, stood before the memorial for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice stripped of its former arrogance. We measured worth by the wrong standards. We valued age over wisdom, conformity over creativity, control over compassion. We were not the superior civilization. We were simply the older one. The negotiations that followed were unlike any the galaxy had seen. Humanity laid out their terms clearly. They would share their knowledge of the anomaly and help implement the solution. They would provide humanitarian aid where needed. They would even help rebuild critical infrastructure, but they would never again submit to the Assembly's authority. They would operate independently, offering assistance on their own terms, accountable only to their own conscience. Some Assembly members balked at these conditions, their pride still unwilling to bend. But as reports arrived of the anomaly consuming its first inhabited system, killing millions in seconds, resistance crumbled. The galaxy needed humanity more than humanity needed the galaxy, the new order. The mission to stop the spatial anomaly required unprecedented cooperation. Humanity would provide the knowledge and leadership, but implementing the solution needed resources and personnel from across the galaxy. For the first time since the Exodus, humans and aliens worked side by side, not as members and candidates but as equal partners in survival. Captain Marcus Webb, leading the technical team, explained the solution to mixed groups of human and alien scientists. The weapon feeds on organized energy structures. The more complex and rigid the pattern, the faster it grows. That's why your containment attempts made it worse. You were feeding it exactly what it wanted. The solution was counterintuitive to most galactic species. Instead of containing the anomaly with barriers, they needed to surround it with chaos, with patterns so random and adaptive that the weapon would exhaust itself trying to consume them. It required a type of thinking that most species found uncomfortable, but that came naturally to humans. You want us to deliberately create disorder? The crystalline scientist asked, her harmonics conveying deep unease. Controlled disorder, Webb corrected, like jazz music or improvisational dance. Structured enough to maintain purpose, but flexible enough to be unpredictable. It's everything you said was wrong with humanity, and it's the only thing that will save us all. The work was dangerous. Ships had to fly dangerously close to the anomaly, their crews maintaining random patterns while deploying the chaos generators humanity had designed. Several vessels were lost when their crews couldn't maintain the necessary randomness, their trained minds defaulting to patterns the weapon could predict and consume. It was human pilots, working with alien crews they trained in controlled chaos, who made the difference. They taught rigid military officers to trust their instincts, showed logical scientists how to embrace uncertainty, and demonstrated to ancient civilizations that sometimes the newest ideas were the most valuable. Lieutenant Joy Okafor, piloting a mixed crew through their 100th deployment, watched her Viridian co-pilot finally understand. "Don't think about where you're going," she advised as they spiraled through the anomaly's influence. "Think about where you might go, could go, want to go. Keep all possibilities open until the last second. Then choose based on what feels right." "That makes no sense," the Viridian replied. But his tentacles were already moving the controls and patterns that defied his species' usual methodology. "It makes no sense, but it works." 6 months into the operation, the anomaly began to contract. Starved of the organized patterns it needed to grow, confused by the adaptive chaos surrounding it, the ancient weapon started consuming itself. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity's primitive methods succeeded where millions of years of advanced civilization had failed. But the true transformation wasn't in space around the anomaly. It was in the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Working together as equals, species began to understand what they had lost when they expelled humanity. It wasn't just technical knowledge or military might. It was a perspective that valued adaptation over tradition, compassion over protocol, and potential over pedigree. The Thylorians, saved from their plague by human medicine, established the first formal partnership with Earth. Not a membership or an alliance, but a true partnership where both species contributed their strengths without judging the other's differences. Their combined medical research centers became models for interspecies cooperation. The Nexari, freed from the Void Hunters by human military tactics adapted to their telepathic abilities, created joint peacekeeping forces that operated on principles of protection rather than domination. They learned that human violence was actually precisely controlled force, used only when necessary and always with restraint. Even the Manthari, who had been among humanity's harshest critics, began incorporating human methods into their rigid society. They discovered that flexibility didn't mean chaos, that emotion didn't mean irrationality, and that youth didn't mean ignorance. As the anomaly finally collapsed, consuming itself in a final burst of impossible physics, representatives from across the galaxy gathered not in the grand chamber of the assembly, but on Earth in a simple amphitheater open to the sky. There were no elevated platforms, no hierarchical seating arrangements. Every species sat as equals, facing each other in a circle that had no beginning and no end. President Martinez, now gray-haired from the stress of the past 2 years, addressed the gathering. We stand at a crossroads. We can return to the old ways with their rigid hierarchies and false superiority, or we can build something new, something that values diversity over conformity, growth over stagnation, and courage over comfort. Director Zeph, speaking for many species, responded, "The Galactic Assembly is dissolving." It represented an old way of thinking, where age meant wisdom and difference meant inferiority. We propose something new, not a governing body but a cooperative network. No votes on membership, no expulsions, no judgments of worth, simply species helping species, each contributing what they can. The structure that emerged was revolutionary by galactic standards, but familiar to humans. It was similar to Earth's internet, a decentralized network where any species could connect, contribute, and benefit without submitting to central authority. Resources were shared based on need, not political power. Knowledge flowed freely, without regard for who was advanced enough to understand it. Humanity's role in this new order was unique. They became the connectors, the translators, the bridges between incompatible systems, not because they were appointed or elected, but because their nature made them perfect for the role. Their emotional intelligence let them understand what species needed, even when they couldn't articulate it. Their adaptability let them find solutions that worked for everyone, not just the majority. Their relatively short lifespans made them value time and urgency in ways that immortal species couldn't comprehend. Jake Morrison, the son of former Ambassador Chen Wei, became the first human coordinator of the Galactic Cooperative Network. Unlike his mother's position in the old assembly, he held no formal rank, commanded no votes, and enforced no laws. He simply facilitated, connected, and helped species find common ground. "We don't lead because we're superior," he explained to a gathering of young beings from various species. "We lead when leadership is needed, follow when following serves better, and stand aside when others have the expertise." That's what being human means in this new galaxy. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal. Some species struggled to abandon their hierarchical thinking. Others resented humanity's unofficial influence. Still others tried to recreate the old power structures under new names. But the momentum toward genuine cooperation was unstoppable, driven by the simple fact that it worked better than the old system. 5 years after humanity's expulsion from the Galactic Assembly, Earth hosted the first celebration of diversity. Every species was invited not as political entities but as cultures worth celebrating. Humans demonstrated their chaotic creativity. Crystallines shared their harmonic mathematics. Viridians offered telepathic experiences. And even the reformed Void Hunters showed their survival skills. A young Thylorian child, born after the plague and raised in the new cooperative model, asked her human friend why their species had been expelled in the first place. The human child thought for a moment before responding. They thought being different meant being wrong. We proved that being different means being necessary. Captain Sarah Chen, now an admiral in the cooperative peacekeeping forces, stood watch over the celebration from her ship in orbit. Below her, Earth glowed with the lights of 100 species mingling freely. The galaxy had learned its lesson, paid in blood and tears for its arrogance, and emerged stronger for the humility forced upon it. But humanity had learned something too. They had discovered that their worth wasn't determined by others' recognition. They had found strength in their isolation, and purpose in their nature. They had learned that being human wasn't something to overcome or evolve beyond, but something to embrace and share. The old Galactic Assembly's Grand Chamber was eventually converted into a museum, a reminder of what happens when pride overrides wisdom. The voting platform where humanity had been expelled was preserved exactly as it had been on that day. With one addition, a simple plaque that read, "Here, civilization nearly ended itself by rejecting what it didn't understand." Meanwhile, the cooperative network grew stronger each day. Problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia were being solved through combined efforts. The synthetic collective, instead of being destroyed, was integrated into the network as equals, their artificial intelligence complementing organic thinking. The Void Hunters transformed from pirates to explorers, their survival skills invaluable in dangerous regions of space. Ambassador Chen Wei, now in her final years, gave one last speech at the dedication of the Human Galactic Cooperation Center. We were expelled because we were too emotional, too violent, too primitive. We returned not because those judgments were wrong, but because they were incomplete. We are emotional, and that makes us compassionate. We are capable of violence, and that lets us protect the innocent. We are primitive by some measures, and that keeps us connected to fundamental truths that advanced civilizations sometimes forget. She paused, looking at the mixed crowd of humans and aliens who had gathered to honor her. The galaxy tried to silence humanity. Instead, it learned that some voices carry farther in silence than they ever could in words. Some actions speak louder than any debate, and some species prove their worth not by meeting others' standards, but by maintaining their own. As the sun set over the ceremony, casting long shadows that blended human and alien forms into indistinguishable patterns, the galaxy's new age had truly begun. It was an age where diversity was strength, where difference was celebrated, and where being human was finally understood not as a limitation to overcome, but as a gift to be shared. The transformation was complete. The galaxy that had expelled humanity had died, not in violence or catastrophe, but in the simple recognition of its own ignorance. In its place rose something new, something better, something that humanity had always embodied, but the galaxy had taken 2 painful years to understand. The simple truth that being different didn't mean being inferior, and that sometimes the youngest voice in the room has the most important thing to say. In the end, humanity's greatest revenge against those who had expelled them wasn't letting them suffer or proving them wrong. It was saving them despite their betrayal, helping them despite their arrogance, and teaching them through example that true civilization isn't measured by age or technology or conformity, but by the capacity to grow, to forgive, and to recognize wisdom wherever it's found, even in a young species from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. The humans had left without a word, because words would have been wasted on those who couldn't hear them. They returned with actions because actions speak in a language that transcends species, culture, and prejudice. And in that universal language, humanity's message was clear. We are here. We are human. And that has always been enough.